What's up, guys? Welcome to the Connect podcasts. And here we're just going to be talking about the macro, micro, tech, and Web3. And we're also going to be looking to see how we could bridge the gap between the startup world and the VC world. My name is Taib Larakai. I'm the CEO and co founder of Connect. And my co host and also co founder of Connect, Angelo Polvino. What's going on?
What's going on, guys? How's it going today? We're going to
It's
get into
doing
the
good.
macro side of things and how we're feeling about current state of the bull market and all the other exciting stuff that comes along with it.
Right. No, I'm actually curious, dude. Like, do we think ETH is back? Like last month, dude, we were up almost 60%. Do you think this is where we see like a convergence coming in where,
You
altcoin
know,
season's here?
as an ETH holder, and I've had ETH for a while, it's tough when you see prices not break all time highs. When did we actually see run ups for ETH? We saw run ups for ETH in the last bull run to like 4,900 at the peak in early
Right.
November. And
Yeah, didn't hit
we saw
5K, but we're almost there.
and then it crashed back below 1,000 in the bear, and then we've only seen it go back up to 4K. It's been kind of disappointing, you know, compared to Bitcoin that's smashed through its all-time high, plus some, plus a lot of some, and and all the coins that have touched their all-time highs or gone past their all-time highs. So it's hard. I mean, the upgrade went smooth. Um, Obviously, there's been no glitches or anything that goes through the actual code itself, but
Do you think it's the Pectra upgrade played a big part, or is it really just the 4 year cycle like kicking in?
might
Because
just
like
be
the
the
Pectra,
four-year cycle, and who actually knows with it. I, I mean, obviously, the tariffs threw a wrench in everyone's idea of altcoin season, and who knows if we were actually going to get an altcoin season like we have in the past, where everything just goes up. You can throw a dart at a dartboard and watch it rifle to the top. What I do wonder is if maybe if it was pushed off a little bit, because in the last bull market, the after the first top and the little sideways consolidation period we went through in the summer, the first blow off the top is because China banned custody of Bitcoin, Bitcoin mining. The Bitcoin hash rate dropped by 50%. I think it was something crazy, like 75, 80% of the Bitcoin hash rate was in China itself. So
right?
it just completely collapsed it, and everyone was like, "Ah, it's the end of the world. Bitcoin's going to zero. The network's collapsed. The first government has begun banning it." And then all the miners picked up, left China, and ended up helping the Bitcoin network as it further decentralized the network. I think they were going to Kazakhstan for a little bit, because one of the somewhere in the post-Soviet Middle East, because they had cheap oil prices or coal prices or something. A lot of people went to the United States. Of course, I think we have like almost 30% of the hash rate now, and rebuilt the hash rate and broke all-time highs in hash rate 6 months later when we saw the next all-time high. So it just showed that even if the second most powerful country on earth is able to try and outright ban it and the mining of it, that the network can completely rebuild itself without an issue. So I think that was a solid test for people that were waiting for that to occur, to encourage them to know that this was a long-term asset in that respect.
Yeah, that would make sense. Like from the last bull run, the main pinpoint of how we hit that low was from China banning Bitcoin. And I
Mm-hmm.
think this time around it's mostly due to tariffs. And I'm just curious on like how Trump's like trying to handle it in a way where he took it from a standpoint off like the trade deficit. He thought that this way by putting out tariffs would help bring back and jobs out into the US. But from what we've seen, it really isn't going to do that. A lot of the tariffs had to hit the consumers because, of course, corporations are going to increase prices upon ours, us being the biggest consumption in the economic. I think like 16%, like 15, 16% of our GDP is all just consumption. Um, so the 90-day pause that Trump ordered had allowed to kind of redact all not all of them, but we still need more trade deals coming in, but it did allow to provide some sort of ease into the market. I think that's going to stay just for the sense of they want to be able to get reelected because as long if you increase prices, inflation goes up for the consumers, they're going to decide to not reelect you. I want to see on what his next move is. Because at the end of the day, he's trying to bring back as much economy back to the United States. But as far as if it's being right, still unsure. But what do you think on that sense? Do you think we might see more tariffs coming in, or do you think he just uses a different approach? Because I, I I don't see what direction he's looking to go to.
I mean, we signed a deal with England. We signed a solid deal with China, but what is it? 30% tariffs on China still. I think we were only at 10% tariffs on China. So
Right, but I
tariffs
think
still.
they're going back to the negotiating table to see if they just reset and just go 10%, 10%, just like how
Uh,
or
I
how
mean,
it was during Trump's first term.
10%, 10% is best case scenario. 0% is
Right.
another amazing scenario. I mean, who knows if that's actually where it goes? Because obviously China has the willpower, the economic might, and the gut to fight the U.S. economically. They've said it, and I think we can all agree here that the industrial base they've built, the overall scope of their economy, them being a net exporter shows that it's going to be extremely easy for them to, not easy, but it'll be much easier for them to sustain a trade war with the United States than it will be with us. I know that they import a lot of their foods that can cause issues, but there's ways for them to circumvent that in a certain regard without getting too far into the details of it. But I just think that some trade deals need to be signed. There is no need to start a trade war with the entire planet. There's no saying what was going on in Trump's head because, even in his official campaign's website, he said he wanted to maintain the dollar's world reserve currency status while simultaneously bringing industry back to the United States. But in a fiat currency based system, um, especially when you're the fiat currency that's the world reserve currency, so you're the strongest currency on earth, it's going to naturally drain your industrial base. Fundamentally, that's how it works because labor abroad and production abroad is going to become cheaper. And we're in a capitalist society, and companies are free to leave and go chase that cheaper labor. And with our stronger currency and then cheaper labor abroad, it allows us to import more goods at a lower price, which benefits Americans in a lot of ways, but then it hurts the actual industry itself and our industrial base and our steel producers, car makers, etc. But I would say to that it also benefits the pharmaceutical industry, the tech industry, the service-based industry, the tourism industry. It benefits our stock market. So there's trade-offs to it. At the end of the day, we all know that the system's not sustainable because the United States can't take on debt forever. So I'm not saying we should have stayed on that system, but I'm not sure starting a trade war with the entire planet was the correct response to trying to break away from that system. Perhaps it was Trump's way in trying to just break it fundamentally, and I think maybe he was trying to get a blow off top on the stock market because we all know it was pretty overvalued and maybe it could deal with a 20-30% drawdown before we make new highs. But something switched. The 10-year, 30-year treasury yields started going up when they started a trade war with the entire planet because markets don't like uncertainty and markets don't like uncertainty. So, I mean, it was almost like a sell the U.S. event. It wasn't a sell my risk assets and escape to the dollar event. It was a sell my assets in the United States and escape elsewhere event, which um, seems to not have slowed down recently. I mean, last Friday, Moody, the final credit agency, finally downgraded us from our AAA rating. Um, down just one floor. It doesn't mean we're junk bonds or anything yet. Like we can obviously still pay
Do
our
you think
debt
that meant
back.
much?
Huh?
Do you think that meant much with that Moody credit rating? Like, some people say it's politically biased. Some people say, I mean, it is really based on how we're handling our debt, which is true in a way. But
So
like,
like
you,
honestly, them downgrading our debt rating was long overdue. Perhaps there was a little bit of political politicization behind it. They were just like, actually, let's just do it now. Fuck Trump. But I think
right,
Moody's has been planning on downgrading the U.S. debt credit rating for ever. I mean, the first downgrade was. This is why I think it could be political because obviously a lot of people don't like Trump, so they could just be like, perfect. It's about time we downgraded the U.S.'s credit rating at Moody's and also fuck Trump. So now it's about time we're doing what should have been done probably 10 years ago, and we get a chance to take a jab at somebody we don't like. But that is also could be countered by the first major credit rating agency downgraded us in, I believe, 2011 under Obama, a Democrat, and then we were downgraded by the next major credit rating agency in 2022 by Joe Biden. I mean, not by Joe Biden, under Joe Biden. So, two of the three major credit rating agencies downgraded us under Democratic leadership. So you could also just say this was a long time coming and it wasn't really that political in the first place. But part of me thinks maybe a touch of it, but at the end of the day, everybody knew that our credit rating was going to come down. I mean, it should have been down a decade ago, like I said.
Right. I mean, you have Trump right now, I mean, obviously he's trying to keep the U.S. dollar being that global reserve asset. Um, but do you think the new backing for it would result into Bitcoin at some point? I know he loves gold, and I know he's doing a big cryptocurrency push, but I don't know if that's probably just a facade just to be able to say, hey, look, I want to be able to bring back the U.S. dollar being backed by gold again. Um, what do you think about
Um,
that? Do you see that?
well, I mean, obviously, all the legislation Trump's putting into place, the Republicans taking power when the Republican is obviously the pro crypto party, but I mean, with the stablecoin bill getting shot down, for example, the other day, Gillibrand, the New York State senator, was a co-sponsor of that bill and helped craft it. And the night before, some edits were made, and then she went out against it. And
Right.
Trump's involvement in crypto and putting the right people into power at the SEC and making a Treasury Secretary out of Scott Bessent be so friendly to the crypto industry is great. Having the right legislators in place, signing executive orders, lawsuits against Ripple and Coinbase and Kraken are ending. All this is amazing for the regulatory environment. But Trump coming out with this Trump coin was a grift. It was a total grift. What's his inner circle is projected to own 80% of the supply. Um, and him coming out and saying anyone that owns the majority of my coin has permission to meet with me sounds like bribery to me. If I had a stock or my family owned a company with stock in it and I said whoever owns the most of my stock can meet with me, that would be illegal. So why is it any different with Trump coins? Because there's no fucking regulation put in place for it. And I think it kind of ties the SEC's hands because they don't want to hurt their bosses, political stature or, get their boss mad at them. But I think that there would have been reasonable regulation put in place around meme coins had Trump not done that. But because now the Trump family is involved, it's spooked senators. I mean, there's a lot of people on that stablecoin bill that, even though the stablecoin bill had nothing to do with meme coins whatsoever, just a stablecoin bill, completely separate from the Trump family, completely separate from everything, would have benefited the dollar and the U.S. economy a lot, U.S. business a lot, and they shot it down. A lot of them were citing concerns with Trump and corruption within his campaign involved in the crypto space. But I just think it shows us a fundamental disconnect in our politicians that they don't actually understand it. Because if they understood the implications of what a stablecoin bill could do for the United States and continuing U.S. dollar dominance, they wouldn't have done it. But that's another topic for another day that we could dive really deep into and why stablecoins would be good for it. And then your original question was about.
That's the interesting part about it, though. Like people are viewing stable coins as being the way to help the government enter the crypto market. But like USDT is like one of the largest holders of our bonds. But
Treasury
specifically,
bonds, they're a top 5 holder. I forgot.
but I
Maybe they're
believe it's
number
they
4.
hold T bills, which in fact they're like again they're short term, and of course no one really cares about short term as far as you being a government because again they're not holding for the long term. So I mean, as far as like the true benefit these stable coins bring to then hold on to these like 10-year, 30-year, possibly 100-year bonds into the market, I wonder how relevant that will become. I'm unsure on the answer that on how that would be, but I guess like it just needs to sort of play out. I was hoping for that bill to be able to pass to give some sort of clarification on that, but
Yeah, there's no
um,
100-year T bill either. I think it's just 10-year and 30-year. But
right.
um,
Uh,
I believe that they're the largest holder of treasury bonds. You know what I mean? So if you get stablecoin legislation put through, and J.P. Morgan dollar coin and BlackRock dollar coin and all these different dollar coins that are pegged to the U.S. dollar and are able to be used globally now, will create artificial demand for the dollar because when you are proving because a stable coin in theory should have 100% reserves backing it. I actually don't think that was included in the stable coin bill, and that was some people's frets with it. But I could totally agree with. I totally agree that should be some legislation put in place requiring treasury but stablecoin issuers to have proof of 100% reserves.
right.
I mean, there's a lot of reason they could get pushback on that, but like Tether, I think owns like 70%, 80% T bills and cash, and then I think the other 20% is split between Bitcoin and gold, which is fine. They have reserves, they have the money there. They have gold, treasury bills, dollars, and Bitcoin, which some people may have put their hands in the air about the Bitcoin, but for the most part, they're pretty much reserved. I think US dollar coin is 100% T bills and cash on hand. That's USDC. But anyways, Tether is, I believe, the fourth largest buyer of treasuries in the world. So the treasury bonds are how the government finances itself. And for in Argentina, for example, they use Tether because their currency was inflating so much, and the Argentinian government had put capital controls in place to prevent their people from running away from the Argentine peso, and going and getting something like the dollar and further devaluing their currency and exasperating their already ridiculous hyperinflation issue. Um, People were forced to use a currency that was devaluing overnight. There's stories of people in Argentina going around and with their paychecks buying stacks of bricks, and then once they got enough stacks of bricks, they would add an addition to their home because their house was a hard asset, and it would increase the value of their home, which is very intuitive, very smart of them because they had no choice because their currency was completely losing its value day after day, week after week. You know, 200, 300, 400% hyperinflation rates are astronomically high. But then Tether came along, and what you would see when you go to Argentina is that there's an entire secondary black market economy that operates through Tether, and people using cold storage wallets and the internet to send Tether back and forth to one another.
Really?
So it just shows that the dollar is seen as the most stable currency on earth, and that everyone on earth wants dollars. But a lot of these countries and jurisdictions that people are in can't they can't get dollars. A majority of Africa has never stepped in a bank, let alone gone ahead and exchanged
They're
the
afraid
currency
of
they
it.
have for dollars. Even if their government allows them to, how are they going to do it if they're not walking into banks? But now all you need is a wallet and an internet connection, which they can find, um, and they can trade in dollars. And whenever they're trading in dollars, and the more stable coins that are bought through Tether, what is Tether going to do? What is the businesses that run the stablecoins going to do? They're going to buy treasuries, which push yields down, create demand for the dollar artificially, and allow the US government to keep refinancing itself and having huge implications for keeping the US dollar the world reserve currency. And I feel that if Democrats understood that they would be like, oh, this isn't even a political gamble. This shouldn't be political at all. This should be for the own self interest of the health of the economy and the U.S. dollar in the United States. I mean, but they don't get it. And maybe they get it. Maybe some of them don't get it. I'm willing to bet a lot of them just don't understand it. They're juggling so much. They're politicians. It's social justice issues, the economy, getting reelected, meeting with donors. Their schedules are full. They don't have time to sit there and read the Bitcoin standard or read exactly how stable coins work. I guarantee you, most of them did not even read the bill. I promise you, most of them didn't read the bill. They were just told yes or
What?
no by Elizabeth Warren and her anti-crypto army, or leaders in the party like Gillibrand, who said, I signed this bill and I co-sponsored this bill, but they changed things late in it last night that I don't like. And when you get a co-sponsor coming out and saying, actually, no, we can't sign it into law anymore, it puts red flags up for a lot of the Democratic Party. I mean, Rand Paul and another Republican voted against it as well, but I think it's being brought to the floor this week again, so we'll see how it passes. I haven't been paying that close attention to it, but more attention to it than most people. But um, it'll be interesting what happens with the stablecoin bill.
Yeah. For more, I wanted to see how it's all going to turn out with regulation, at least in the crypto space. Because then when you look at it, what's the median age of like who's in the crypto space was around like 32, 33.
Something like that. I don't know that
We're
one
not
off the
going to
top
see
of my head.
we're not going to see anytime soon where there's going to be these crazy Bitcoin standard as our like reserve asset, these stable coins part of um, like our treasury. I know Trump is looking to do that, but for it to actually get passed and like Congress to get behind it, a lot of them are boomers, and boomers don't really like look into it as much compared to what the new wave is. By the time we have power, by the time our generation gets in, millennials, Gen Z, we might see some sort of change where we're then more stable coins and Bitcoin could become that new standard, and possibly that reserve asset. But it seems like Trump is trying to jump the gun a little bit, and I'm just trying to figure out the direction he's looking to go because again, a trade deficit didn't really work. Um, and I guess the next opportunity probably just be capital control. Um, but then it just depends on again what direction he goes with. Um,
I I mean, back to your original question too about whether or not he's trying to move back to a gold standard.
right.
I would think he is in the background. I would think, or I would hope he is. I mean, no one actually knows what's going through his mind and how they think it's going to work. I mean, we have to run through the history of the dollar to understand what they're thinking because a lot of people think that, once Bitcoin becomes a thing, gold is gone. No, that's
So
so.
take us with where it all started. I believe it really kind of majorly started with the Bretton Woods Agreement, would really kind of took us to or the U.S. dollar being the reserve asset.
Yeah. So, what is the name of the fucking? Sorry, I'm looking at this graph quickly. Anyways,
You're good.
um, essentially, what happened with the Bretton Woods Agreement, it was the new financial order that the United States wanted to build post World War II. Um, and there are actually two opposing schools of thought. I got to look up what the name of the currency was. So, Edward Keynes, the guy who created Keynesian economic theory that was fundamental in pulling us out of the Great Depression, and basically what's taught in every single economics and business school on the entire planet as if it's a science and not a theory. I'm not going to dive into why we don't like Keynesian economic theory as Bitcoiners, but that is a whole other different conversation to have. But there were two schools of thought before after World War II, right? So the first one was put forth by Keynes in England, and it was basically creating a system. Dude, they were called orbs or something. Let me Google it real quick. His idea was basically to create a system where, let me type this into my phone. Where the it wasn't orbs. What were the currencies called? So Keynes' idea was, let's see, because it faced resistance by the U.S. Why is the name of the currency? Oh, it was called the Banker, the Bancor,
The bank core.
Bancor. So yeah, Bancor. So essentially, Keynes came up and he had this idea of like an international clearinghouse and an international currency called the Bancor that every country would use and take place and trade with, and there was basically a whole international set of monetary controls where like if countries had structural deficits with each other, the world could come together and basically agree with this new international currency and flip flop it from a deficit, flip flop it from a deficit to a surplus, and they would rebalance as needed, which was never going to work. It was going to require way too much social and economic cohesion. Like imagine getting the Soviet Union and United States to agree on using a common currency during the Cold War. It would have been an absolute fucking disaster. So it was a bad idea. And on top of it being a bad idea, the United States put forth the Bretton Woods Agreement, which was their idea, which was essentially to make the US dollar the world reserve currency because we wanted to dictate how the financial, monetary, and fiscal systems in the entire planet were going to work. And we did that by backing the dollar with gold. Now, since 1934, the US banned citizens from converting their dollars into gold because during the Great Depression, people were running away from the dollar and they had the stock market collapsing, the real estate market collapsing, everything was collapsing. The last thing they needed was the dollar to collapse too. So they they banned the conversion of US dollars to gold for regular everyday citizens and private businesses. So that was never a thing that was allowed to be done um, past that point. I think you were allowed to start buying it again and stuff in the 1970s, I believe. But anyways, so people weren't allowed to exchange the dollars for gold anyway. And during World War II, the United States, by the end of World War II, had 20,000 tons of gold in its reserves. And we allowed sovereign nations to give us dollars, and in exchange, we would give them gold. And I think it was $35 per ounce of gold. Brilliant ish. The thought process was that holding dollars was as good as holding gold because we were backed by gold, and it required every country in the world to have dollars in the bank because it was their reserve currency, and they could either buy dollars at spot price, they could sign business contracts with other countries and agree to pay each other in dollars, or what could they do? They could buy treasury bonds because they were liquid, they accrued value because they had an interest rate attached to them, and it allowed the United States to continue to finance itself via debt. But the issue with that was in the 50s and 60s with the space race, the Vietnam War, the Korean War, the constant big dick contest with the Soviet Union, we spent way too much money. And people saw our deficits increasing, and everyone was responsible. The Germans, the English were like, oh, the US is spending a bit too much money over there. And they all came with the dollars they either converted from bonds or they made for business contracts. And bit by bit, these countries were exchanging their dollars for gold. And it dropped our gold reserves from about 20,000 tons to 8,000 tons, which is a 60% decrease in the US gold reserves. And that was like 20 something years, 15, 20 years, something like that. I think the Bretton
And that
Agreement
stemmed from the Bretton Woods Agreement being able to allow sovereign nations to exchange
to exchange the dollars that they own for gold, and only sovereign nations were allowed to do it in summary. And when sovereign nations saw the United States being irresponsible with the amount of debt they were taking on, the amount of money they were printing, they kind of sounded the alarm internally within their own countries, and they started converting those dollars for gold to get the gold out because they were worried about the status of the
value
dollar.
in the US dollar.
And then in 1971 or 72, Nixon sounded the alarm and said this is no longer sustainable, will collapse the economy, and depegged the US dollar from gold. And no longer could, before it was citizens, now sovereign nations couldn't exchange their dollars for gold anymore, sent the world into shock, caused a recession, inflation. We went through that period of stagflation in the 70s, high inflation, unemployment, et cetera, et cetera. And we signed OPEC though, and that was basically an agreement with the Saudis. The Saudis of which produced a majority of the oil in the world at a cheap price to countries, and oil was the fundamental way countries kept their economies afloat. We basically sold them military equipment in dollars, and we put military bases on their country and agreed to protect them from the Iranians because the Iranians are a bit aggressive. And just protect them from any aggressor in general if they agreed to sell their oil in nothing but dollars. So now if you wanted to buy cheap energy or cheap oil from the Saudis, and other countries eventually started taking place officially in OPEC, or they started taking place non-officially, but they still sold their oil in dollars, like Qatar, Kuwait, etc., etc. And it created unofficial demand for the dollar because people needed dollars to buy oil. And there's only three ways that you can really get dollars. One is treasury bonds off of yield, buying it at spot price with your currency that may be devaluing. And there's a whole bunch of nuances why buying it at spot price can hurt it. If your currency is already devaluing and then you're exchanging your currency for dollars, it'll further devalue your currency. So it might just be best to buy bonds and then sell the bonds for dollars, so you're not exchanging your currency with their currency and making the situation worse. Sometimes it may be good just to buy it at spot, but in less common scenarios. And then you could also just sign business contracts. Like Bolivia is doing a deal with, I don't know, Argentina. They're not gonna transact in either of their local currencies. They're just gonna sign a contract agreeing to pay and be paid in U.S. dollars. So that there was kind of like I want to say like we'll call it like a spider web effect, or a chain event where it spread into other industries, and it's like, well, we need dollars for oil, so why don't we just sell these car parts that we're selling to Bolivia for dollars, and then we have more dollars on hand. If countries wanted to buy oil or businesses wanted to buy oil, they needed dollars, and it kind of petered its way out, or the water spilt out over the top. Ty, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. There we go.
Okay. Sorry, you got stuff on your screen, but and I would say it basically overflowed into other industries because you needed dollars for the fundamental resource to keep the economy afloat, which was oil. So it spiderwebbed out into other industries as well, and they just started transacting in nothing but dollars. I think even today, like 70 something percent of the world's transactions are done in dollars because you need dollars to purchase oil.
Right.
And I know OPEC was just scrapped, but 50 years of OPEC is going to have lasting effects. You can't just stop using the dollars that day.
And I
But
believe
that's the history of how it worked.
and it's not just like
And
50 years of just OPEC too. I mean, you also had, I mean, China coming in, being able to just export, for them to export their goods, they have to do it in a dollar. Another huge major mercantilist country had to be able to provide us some value as well. Because again, being an exporter of a lot of goods, also devalued their currency of the yuan. So they needed a subset of that, which was the US dollar. So you had OPEC with oils being sold, and then you have um, China trying to find the next currency to be able to help reserve their money, and they got U.S. dollars, put in a bunch of treasury bonds, and that's another big reason why one of the biggest holders of our treasury bonds is also China too,
yeah,
right?
China, Japan, Tether. I don't know who the other couple are. Germany will probably be up there. I mean, people need U.S. debt. I mean, if you need dollars to buy oil, you need dollars to buy other goods because, like I said, it's spilt out into other industries, and you need dollars to buy other goods now too. Then you're not just going to hold them at spot price when they're devaluing because it's an inflationary currency. You're going to buy bonds because typically it'll beat inflation and it preserves the value of the money you have, and they're pretty liquid, so you can sell them when you need them. It depends on the scenario, and that system's kind of breaking at the seams now. Countries are starting to try and transact in things other than dollars and move away from the U.S. dollar system, and to just cap it off, like tariffing countries now and showing more economic, basically weaponizing the dollar and the U.S. economic system to hurt other countries. It's just going to push people away from this system faster. And that's just the history of the dollar as well. So, like, we kind of coerced and forced every country on earth into the Bretton Woods Agreement, and then by signing OPEC, we enforced countries around the earth, around the world, to need the dollar via OPEC. So we've kind of been strong arming countries into bringing dollars into keeping the dollar the world reserve currency status, keeping the status quo for the United States. And now we're sick of that, or maybe we're not sick of it. We can't really tell with the administration. But we obviously want to change the way the world financial order works. And now we're trying to use our economic might to strong arm the world into doing it again. And we're just not in the same standings we were in the 70s. We're not in the same standings we were in the 40s and 50s. So doing that today is going to be a lot more difficult. And instead of forcing, it may force everybody into a new system for a little bit, but it's just prolonging the inevitable of coming off of the US dollar as the world reserve currency, because a purely fiat currency shouldn't have been the world reserve currency in the first place. It should have never occurred. And that's another discussion on why it occurred, but we could dive into
Right,
that. But that's how I want to cap things off tonight. I mean,
of course.
a lot of food for thought, a lot of rambling on my side, and there's a lot of things we could dive deeper into, but another day.
No, perfect way to end it off. And we could definitely like continue this in the next podcast. I think this was great. We're able to kind of get our thoughts down, and it was interesting just to be able to know. Yeah, you have to really know the history of like how the dollar became the reserve currency to understand on why Bitcoin's a thing,
Yeah.
and why we need to be able to move away from it. But this is who we are, and the new wave is here, and this is what we want to do on the podcast to be able to talk about all those things. And we're glad that you're listening in. We're glad that you're also on the journey with us, and thanks guys for listening.
Yeah.
All right, guys,
Have a good one, guys.
enjoy.